Never assume a parent is actually parenting just because they're in the house. Few moments in modern reality television illustrate paternal dereliction quite as vividly as the episode in which a child nearly died because her father was, allegedly, busy with another household's laundry. The narrative has been replayed often, but the recent retelling in Christine Brown's book crystallizes the full absurdity. Truly, gravely ill with flu and kidney failure, was effectively left in the hands of Aspen, a child who had no authority, no medical training, and frankly, no business being assigned the role of family triage nurse. She noticed Truly's deteriorating condition, raised the alarm, and was met with paternal indifference disguised as domestic obligation. The excuse was almost theatrical in its incompetence. When confronted with the report that Truly's eyes were crossing, a sign of imminent medical crisis, her father reportedly mused that she might simply need glasses, a diagnosis worthy of a shrug, except for the minor detail that the urgent care doctor, not a precocious sibling, had already flagged serious illness before the mother even left town. This was not an unforeseeable decline. It was a child already known to be sick, relegated behind a basket of laundry. The irony, of course, is that this same man would later perform a zealous commitment to family health during the COVID era, invoking protocols with the solemnity of a head of state. The contrast between the grand speeches and the grim reality is almost poetic, if one enjoys poetry in the key of cognitive dissonance. The show generously attempted to soften the optics by announcing that a nanny was present, which only sharpened the central point. He wasn't caring for anyone. Older siblings were managing Christine's younger children, the nanny was tending to another household entirely, and he appeared to be doing little more than perfecting his talent for strategic absence. The laundry story begins to resemble less a duty and more an alibi that hadn't been test-driven for plausibility. Even more revealing is the notion that such an excuse was expected to be accepted without question, as though the natural hierarchy of priorities placed another adult's household chores above the medical emergency of one's own child. The casualness with which that logic was deployed says everything about the value placed on the children from that household, a value eclipsed elsewhere, as later seasons made painfully clear. Truly, who once timidly observed that she used to be your sweetheart, stands as perhaps the most haunting example of how attention can be reassigned like surplus property. The pattern was not new. Earlier footage shows an infant Truly in a home where 6 children were effectively left to self-govern while he lounged in a chair and deputized Aspen to locate formula. The image is almost cinematic. A man surrounded by children, yet somehow managing to parent none of them. What emerges from all these accounts is not a single lapse, but a sustained demonstration of misplaced priorities wrapped in self-serving rationalizations. It is difficult to imagine a more unflattering portrait. A patriarch who presides over a large family while outsourcing the actual parenting to minors, nannies, and fate itself. One might hope that revisiting these moments would inspire reflection, perhaps even a modicum of regret. But until that day arrives, the record speaks plainly, and the record is damning. Are you someone who's finally realizing that Kody Brown's idea of tenderness looks suspiciously like strategic helplessness? When Kody Brown strutted down a San Francisco red carpet and described Robin as tender, the unintended honesty was almost touching, if only in the way a slow-motion car crash is touching. The remark, offered as though it were a compliment, neatly summarized the dynamic he has spent years engineering. A wife soft enough to make him look tough, meek enough to make him look decisive, and deferential enough to validate the myth of his own indispensability. This cultivated fragility, of course, crumbles the moment it encounters reality. The supposedly delicate spouse, who couldn't possibly keep up in matters of fitness, somehow managed to hurl a dinner party table across a room when the seating arrangement failed to flatter her ego. The act revealed a simple truth. The tender flower narrative survives only because it benefits the storyteller. In practice, It is less rose petal, more poison ivy. The larger irony is that the qualities being praised, softness, neediness, ornamental devotion, are precisely those that ensure the relationship works for him and no one else. Independence among the original three wives was framed as incompatibility. Dependence in the fourth is rebranded as romance. In this retelling, strength was always the problem, and weakness was always the prize.
Yet even the hand-picked prize comes with a bill.
Of all his partners, Robin has proven the most financially draining and the least inclined toward effort, a combination that tends to sour even the most self-deluded patriarch. The price of the so-called soulmate era has been steep, and the return on investment dwindles as youth, charm, and marketable sheen give way to something far less convenient, particularly when juxtaposed with the polished social circles he now courts. It requires no clairvoyance to imagine the next act, a strategic escape route paved toward someone younger, sleeker, and preferably influential enough to outsource the labor of upholding his ego. This cycle is hardly novel. Men throughout history have perfected the art of discarding the partners who carried them through lean years, only to replace them with glossy replicas once comfort and notoriety arrive. The pattern is so familiar, it barely qualifies as scandal. It is simply the choreography of male midlife reinvention. Meanwhile, the irony remains unacknowledged. Three women endured decades of instability, poverty, and an ever-expanding brood, only to be replaced by someone who would likely abandon ship at the first hint of genuine hardship. But in the mythology of self-made masculinity, gratitude is optional, accountability is unnecessary, and reinvention is always just one younger companion away. In the end, the only thing truly tender in this saga is the ego being so desperately protected. Everything else is strategy, performance, and an endless reshuffling of wives to maintain an image that was never particularly convincing in the first place. They'll reminisce about special memories in that car, but here's what those memories really cost. The infamous Lexus convertible, purchased as a dating car long before the cameras rolled, has always carried an air of midlife crisis desperation. But knowing its true origin story gives that gleaming photo an entirely new layer of tackiness. Pair it with the recent extravagance of commissioning an absurdly overpriced painting with all the artistic gravitas of a nursery room prank, and a fairly clear portrait emerges. This is a man whose financial priorities orbit exclusively around himself. The irony, of course, is that the family PR machine managed to spin every fiscal misstep back onto one of the wives. Audiences were expertly herded toward criticizing Mary's notorious wet bar, all while the real budgetary bonfire was parked in the driveway wearing a convertible top. Even Mary's so-called indulgence conveniently overshadowed the far more relevant detail that she and Kody were running an MLM operation out of her living room, an enterprise that apparently didn't disrupt anyone's storyline nearly as much as a minor home upgrade. Meanwhile, the family children allegedly walked around hungry, wearing shoes worn down to spiritual concepts, while one of Janelle's car windows was literally being held closed with duct tape. Faced with a much-needed influx of money, any functional patriarch might begin with the basics. Tires not resembling balding pythons, an oil change, perhaps even addressing the duct-taped portal posing as a car window. But no, why invest in safety and stability when a shiny two-seater promises the illusion of youth and desirability? Practicality is so unbecoming when one is courting potential wives. The contrast is stark. Many men, fathers, husbands, brothers, would forego their own comforts long before allowing their families to travel in vehicles best described as neglected scrap metal. Some even sacrificed treasured possessions to ensure their children's safety. Yet here stood a father who chose a convertible over a functioning family car, apparently hoping that arriving to dates in a modest SUV might tarnish the image he hoped to project to the newest, hottie he'd spotted at church. And then, as if the narrative needed more tone-deaf nostalgia, came Robin's wistful eulogy for the convertible, complete with references to the special memories she and Kody shared in it. Because nothing tugs at the heartstrings quite like romanticizing a car purchased while other members of the household were patching together their vehicles with adhesive hardware supplies. The final layer of absurdity lies in the reported democratic facade, expenditures allegedly voted on by the entire family. If this is true, and every wife signed off on driving children around in glorified metal coffins while he cruised in a two-seater monument to ego, then responsibility is shared evenly across the ballot. But make no mistake, this saga reveals one unmistakable truth. When money entered the equation, character stepped forward, and that character arrived in a Lexus convertible. Top down, completely unbothered by the duct tape flapping in the lane behind him.
If you've ever questioned why fans embraced Christine and Janelle over Robin, the answer is painfully simple. From the very beginning, Robin appeared convinced she would be the breakout darling of the series. The plan seemed simple enough. Position herself as the favored wife, the photogenic ingenue, the one viewers would supposedly flock to. And in service of that grand self-appointment, Christine became the first and most convenient target. By season 3, the competitive edge was no longer subtle. It was a full-time sport. The problem, of course, was that the audience inconveniently preferred Christine and Janelle. Viewers gravitated toward the warmth, the competence, the humor. Traits Robin apparently assumed could be overridden with strategic posing and the belief that being the thinnest and prettiest would clinch the vote. When it didn't, resentment seeped out through Kody, who became the messenger for grievances Robin never had the courage or clarity to voice directly. Her ambitions were never limited to public perception. A particularly chilling moment came when she corrected her children for calling Kody by his actual name, insisting they immediately transition to Daddy, a title that generally requires more than a few months of acquaintance and, traditionally, doesn't overwrite the presence of an involved biological father. But subtlety has never been part of the repertoire. The takeover was comprehensive, deliberate, and astonishingly swift. Small wonder that Isabel approached David with caution. Her only frame of reference was watching a man step seamlessly into a paternal role that did not belong to him, nudging the actual father out of the frame. The discomfort wasn't theoretical. Any reasonable person would question a dynamic in which a near stranger is promoted to daddy status before the emotional dust has even settled. Robin's attempts to edge out the other wives extended far beyond emotional territory. Whenever the children praised Christine's cooking, Robin's irritation could have been measured with seismographic equipment. Mary was the family photographer, until Robin acquired an expensive camera. Christine was the maternal center of gravity, until Robin attempted to step into the role without the slightest inclination to perform the actual work. Even fiscal responsibility became a borrowed costume. After Janelle bailed her out of debt, Robin suddenly rebranded herself as financially disciplined, a curious claim for someone with 3 names attached to 3 separate trails of bad credit. Christine was always the easiest target. Mary was essential for the legal marriage transfer. Janelle managed the finances and had children Kody actually favored, making her inconvenient to antagonize. But Christine, the beloved caretaker, the emotional core, held the role Robin most coveted, yet least intended to earn. It was far simpler to displace her than to match her. The warning signs were present from day one. The soulmate proclamations, the infatuated gazes, and the theatrical tears when confronted with Christine's hurt all signaled a woman auditioning not for a family, but for a crown. And from the very first episode, commentary across the internet recognized the performance for exactly what it was. The expectation of becoming the show's star collapsed almost immediately when viewers embraced the so-called larger ladies instead. The bitterness has lingered ever since, and for that, Christine deserves a standing ovation. Here's why the story of Robin as the villain
falls apart. Kody didn't need corrupting. He arrived pre-assembled. Kody Brown continues to present himself as an embattled patriarch, besieged by envy and misunderstanding, while somehow overlooking the glaringly obvious. No one is jealous of Robin. The only widespread concern regarding her is decidedly medical, not emotional. Yet this fiction of universal envy persists, possibly because it is far more flattering than acknowledging the deep frustration his choices have produced. At the center of this saga is a leader profoundly susceptible to flattery and manipulation, particularly from the one household that has absorbed 2 decades worth of diverted funds. Money intended for a collective family mysteriously found itself underwriting the comfort and whims of a select few, including children who contributed little beyond attitude. The finances in question were not personal earnings, but the accumulated work of 3 wives whose labor, both emotional and economic, propped up the entire enterprise. The business record is equally inspiring. Failed ventures littered the past. Yet somehow, the most impressive misstep remains the investment in a hobby enterprise that evaporated funds faster than they could be earned. The money squandered on that particular passion project could have financed college educations for a small village, let alone the 13 children who actually existed.
Meanwhile, the original wives were already supporting their households through additional employment, long before the narrative of their supposed financial dependence emerged. Their children worked, studied, earned scholarships, and built futures largely through their own efforts. By contrast, the residents of the sprawling mansion, now apparently shocked at the absence of communal support, might consider the revolutionary notion of obtaining actual jobs. Amusingly, there are those who frame Kody as some poor soul led astray by an overbearing partner, as though he were a passive instrument rather than the engineer of his own dysfunction. Robin may indeed be a problem, but she is not the problem. She did not corrupt a noble man. She simply applauded the version of him that the other wives refused to indulge. She embraced his worst impulses as virtues. They expected accountability. She offered adoration, and so he chose the path of least resistance. The notion that redemption could be achieved only by abandoning Robin in financial ruin says more about the desperation for narrative symmetry than any genuine quest for justice. It also requires ignoring the misogyny inherent in prescribing salvation through the punishment of yet another woman. The reality is simpler. The only consistent author of this chaos is Kody himself. In the world he designed, one either plays the game or suffers the consequences. Robin learned the rules early. The others merely tired of losing. This is the moment the Flagstaff lie falls apart, and it happens right in front of the cameras. The great mystery of whether Kody Brown is intentionally manipulative or simply chaotically self-interested finally resolves itself in Season 13, where subtlety goes to die, and the Flagstaff move reveals itself with all the grace of a poorly staged magic trick. For years, one might generously assume that the man lacked the strategic depth required for actual manipulation. Falling headfirst for Robin would be disastrous, yes, but hardly proof of Machiavellian talent. And yet, a rewatch accompanied by Christine's memoir offers a startlingly clear view. The plan was never collaborative, and the pretense of democratic decision-making was just that, a pretense. Robin's silence during the infamous meeting is practically its own confession. The only time she rouses herself is to stress the urgency of moving that summer, a timing she treats less like a proposal and more like an established timeline. Meanwhile, she and Kody sit with politely folded hands and tightly pursed lips, the patient expressions of 2 people pretending to entertain options long after the final decision has been made. And then there is Kody himself, engaged in the kind of theatrical dithering usually reserved for sitcom teenagers trying to hide a broken lamp. He scrolls pointlessly on his phone, pitches faux neutral questions to the group, and even musters a bit of devil's advocacy with Christine. Reverse psychology so transparent it could qualify as public art. Layer onto this his tortured outline of needing a liberal city in a conservative state, and the entire performance becomes nothing short of operatic farce. The true giveaway, however, arrives in the form of Dayton's college enrollment. When the family lands in Flagstaff, Dayton is already admitted and situated while the rest are scrambling for housing, schools, and basic logistics. Applying to specialized programs, particularly those offering robust support for autistic students, requires months of testing, paperwork, and interviews. None of this occurs overnight. The timeline makes one of two things true. Either the move was predetermined long before the so-called group decision, or Robin had already become the sole confidant in a marriage advertised as plural. In either scenario, the betrayal is the same. Everybody else was kept in the dark. Yes, the program was excellent for Dayton, and his access to it is a commendable priority. But prioritizing one child does not require derailing the lives of dozens of others, unless the household's functional hierarchy has already been revised to place one mother and her children at the top. And revised it was. The fallout list is long. Gwen and Gabe forced to abandon thriving extracurriculars. Maddie and Caleb uprooted yet again, despite returning to Las Vegas to be near the family. Aspen, Mitch, Logan, and Michelle left behind. And the original 3 wives pressured to surrender homes they owned in exchange for unstable housing in a pricier market. Janelle never owned another home. Christine and Janelle endured separation from their own children so that Robin could hover over hers. The move, in short, required collective sacrifice from everyone, except, conveniently, Dayton, Robin, and Kody. Even the small details betray the ruse. During the presentation scene, Kody distributes binders with landscape-formatted pages. The original 3 wives open them in portrait first, then rotate them to follow along. Robin, curiously, opens hers directly to landscape, as one does when already familiar with the contents. And then comes the final absurdity: a multi-household relocation undertaken with no secured housing, no plan, and no coherent justification beyond the vague insistence that it needed to happen immediately. This might be understandable in an emergency, except the family already used the emergency move card in their relocation to Las Vegas. No monogamous household, let alone a plural one, moves children across states on a whim. The logic collapses under even minimal scrutiny. The Flagstaff debacle does not merely hint at manipulation, it announces it loudly, repeatedly, and with all the subtlety of a binder opened, knowingly, sideways. Stop blaming a disability for behavior that looks suspiciously like strategy. The ongoing debate over Robin's capabilities has taken an oddly charitable turn, with some observers determined to diagnose a severe reading disability as the master key to her every baffling decision. It is a generous theory, almost touchingly so. After all, what better way to rationalize years of erratic choices, suspiciously convenient helplessness, and theatrical confusion than by imagining an undiagnosed academic struggle? Proponents of this view point to moments such as the infamous "Y is for Wyoming" scene, where Mary's expression seemed to register something between disbelief and resignation, while Robin's own face hinted at a woman fighting a battle with the alphabet. Then there was the now legendary meltdown on the UNLV campus, where navigating a graduation ceremony, complete with directional signage placed at nearly absurd intervals, apparently proved too great an intellectual labyrinth. If one accepts the disability hypothesis, suddenly everything snaps into place. The alleged high school dropout, the conveniently timed pregnancy, the chronic dependence on a partner to manage even the simplest logistics, and, of course, the ever-present nanny whose duties seem to extend well beyond childcare and into basic homework triage. It is a compelling narrative, if one is determined to absolve Robin of responsibility. Under this interpretation, every emotional explosion around higher education becomes a trauma response. College campuses trigger memories of abandoned opportunities. A sister wife pursuing a degree becomes a personal affront, and someone else's graduation transforms into a psychological minefield. In this retelling, resentment isn't petty jealousy.
It is the existential dread of a woman convinced she can never achieve what others do, despite evidence that this belief need not be true. But then comes the counter-argument, delivered by those who have encountered this behavioral pattern before and recognize it instantly. Weaponized incompetence. The kind deployed with surgical precision to derail birthdays, dance recitals, graduations, any event daring to spotlight someone else. According to this view, the so-called confusion at UNLV was not a symptom, but a strategy, a reliable method for dragging attention back to the self while maintaining the veneer of wide-eyed innocence. Even Robin's rare moments of apparent literacy, such as reading from the family mission statement during the commitment ceremony, failed to settle the matter. After all, recitation proves only that a person can memorize a script, not interpret it. Many a toddler has pulled off the same party trick with a cherished bedtime book, confidently reading words while gazing at the wrong page. Ultimately, the most unsparing interpretation dispenses with diagnostic speculation entirely. Under that lens, there is no reading disability to explain away the behavior, only a consistent pattern of manipulation, entitlement, and self-interest. It is, admittedly, the least compassionate explanation. It also happens to be the simplest. In the end, whether one attributes Robin's conduct to learning challenges, emotional instability, or plain old character flaws, says more about the observer's tolerance for excuses than it does about her. But one thing seems certain. If confusion is indeed her chosen performance style, she has perfected it with remarkable dedication. Subscribe.